This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Economics. Everyone has questions about their farm. From general inquiries to in-depth fertilizer questions, find straightforward answers at nutrien-economics.com.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday as well. Big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. And you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. How about that? Okay, I hope you had yourself a great weekend. And now we're into the back half of October. Incredibly, insanely hard to believe, but it's the reality. Some farmers across the country trying to get the fall work done. We got some sunflowers and corn to finish in parts of Western Canada, maybe some canola as well. But also Central and Eastern Canada really getting into the depths of that bean harvest and looking forward to getting into that corn that we continue to hear cautious optimism about. And today we're going to talk agronomics. We got two great guests. We're going to be joined as always by Peter Wheatpeat Johnson. We're going to cover a number of different topics, but also the cool part is we've got another guest here today. I've been trying to get him for a while. He is over in Australia, and I have so much respect for his knowledge when it comes to nutrients and VR. Just a great expert, and that is Wes Andersen. He's with Croptimistic Technologies. That's the company that has SWOT maps. And they've been doing some great work, and looking forward to having Wes today on the show to talk about, are we just maybe a little bit too focused on N? And what's some of the consequences of that? Yeah, pretty cool stuff. Okay, if you want to send me some feedback, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break and get to Wes Andersen of Croptimistic Technologies right after this.
As a grower, you spend a lot of time focused on the details. And sometimes it's only after harvest that you can step back and see the bigger picture. At AGI, we spend a lot of time focused on details too, making sure you can store your grain how you need to and move it when you need to. Learn more at aggrowth.com.
Peter Johnson at Wheatpeat, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Boron is an essential micronutrient for plant growth, and without boron, your crops can't absorb the macronutrients they need for higher yields. Although borates occur naturally, boron deficiency is a common soil problem. Whether in direct soil application, through fertigation, or as a foliar spray, US Borax has the right refined product for your crops. US Borax products are specifically formulated to combine with other fertilizers, lowering your application costs. Learn more at borax.com/ag.
Do you have a real cool shop? A shop maybe you just built, you're super proud of, it's got some really cool features, or maybe it's a shop that you've had for years that has a whole bunch of stories related to the operations of your farm, and it's super cool and has some historical things to chat about. We want to hear from all of you, because we're passionate about shops around here. We got a new series launch. It's called RealAg Shop. It's brought to you by Princess Auto, and we want to feature your cool shop. All you got to do is reach out to me, Haney at RealAgriculture.com. We're joined right now by Wes Andersen. He is VP of Agronomy of Croptimistic Technology, based out of Australia. Hey, Wes, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm good, Shaun. Thanks.
Okay, now Wes, you caught my attention. I was scrolling through LinkedIn. I was killing some time, having a glass of wine, and I saw you post this comment. Okay, we're gonna talk about what you mean by this and the why of it. The more soil tests I see, the more I realize that there is too much focus on variable rate nitrogen and not enough focus on the VR of other nutrients, lime, gypsum, targeted drainage, and even VR pesticides. You're just not going to fix a nutrient imbalance with more N. Let's talk about that and what you're seeing, Wes, and what prompted you to post that.
Yeah, well, I've recently put together the ability to run some pretty high level analytics and all of our soil data that our team in Western Canada is taking this fall. Just our own team under Croptimistic, none of our partners, but we cover a lot of acres right across Western Canada, and not including the Peace, but it's a lot of samples, and I was looking at some of the ranges of nutrients that we see and whatnot, and of course analyzing it by SWOT zone and that sort of thing. And it's fascinating, and the number of samples we're starting to see that are critically low, and I mean I'm some seriously low in things like potassium, phosphate, even zinc and copper. pH is a really emerging issue, and I know other soil scientists have talked about this as well in some publications in the last year or two. We're starting to see some really bad issues from acid soils. So there's a lot more to talk about than just nitrogen, which has gotten a lot of the focus, and especially with variable rate, and I get it. It's been the big expense probably, and the nutrient we apply the most of, but it's certainly no more critical than the other ones.
Yeah, it tends to be the one that we sort of, when we think about and talk about yield, that's the one that everybody jumps to first, and so it really does get a lot of the focus. Is that kind of the why of it?
Yeah, for sure. And it's the one that gets often anyway, the most visual crop response, right? And we all like to see things. But the reality is, like, there's heaps and heaps of data, and like some of it goes back to the 60s and 70s, even when some of the best old soil fertility researchers started doing their thing, right? And there's lots of data to show that when something else is limiting, whether it's phosphate or potassium or sulfur, that end response curve tends to flatten out really early, right? And you max out the nitrogen or yield response from nitrogen at relatively low rates when something else is limiting. And so it's, we can't look at each nutrient alone, right? They're not mutually exclusive. You've got to really take a holistic viewpoint of the whole thing. And some of it's complicated. I get it. Like, you get into the soil chemistry in regards to pH and some of those pH extremes. I was just looking at our data this morning. Like, if I look at our whole data set, all zones, all soil zones, etc., our topsoil pH ranges from 4.4 to 8.7, right? Wow. And that's just in Western Canada. See, we're getting more and more of those samples that are below 5 pH. And then keep in mind, none of those are from the Peace Country either. You go up into the Peace Country. I was just talking to one of our partners up there yesterday, actually, and he's seeing these similar issues. They got lots of acid soils that are causing a lot of issues around aluminum toxicity and manganese toxicity. So got to be thinking about all that stuff.
Now, Wes, on the pH comment, is that pH range? Is that how it's always been, or is there certain things that we're doing that is dropping that number?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Shaun. So I think, there's some areas like northern Alberta, maybe the northern fringe of Saskatchewan even, and the Peace Country. They've always had some acid soils, even in the early days of fertilizer use, right? So that's just a natural parent material thing. Long term, over thousands of years of soil development, there's been acidification occurring on those very lubisols. But yeah, fertilizer use and just simply crop removal and rainfall over time all contribute to acidification. So we see some very clear trends in our data by our management zones, our SWAT zones, where those, like say in northern Alberta, for example, we tend to get a lot of like sandier knolls with low organic matter in the upper landscape positions. The lower landscape positions tend to have deep black soils, high organic matter, more clay content, lots of buffering capacity that resist that acidification over time. So then what you get is a trend from sort of SWAT zone 1 to 10, upper landscape position, a lower landscape position, a lower pH to higher pH generally, right? Every field's different. There's always some exceptions, but yeah, I mean, we would regularly see fields that have pH of 5.5 to 7.5 in northern Alberta, for example. That's quite common. And then of course we get those extremes where we're getting those sandy knolls that have been acidified. And a lot of the time when you dive into some fertilizer or management history, a lot of those fields have had a lot of canola with a lot of ammonium sulfate applied at very high rates. So you get in the Edmonton area, for example, lots of cheap ammonium sulfate fines. Farms sometimes think or get sold in the idea that, oh, it's cheap nitrogen. I'll, hammer on 150 pounds an acre or 200 pounds an acre. Why not? Really, there's some instances where we're probably starting to do more harm than good by overuse of some of those products that are contributing to that.
You mentioned also seeing low phos.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Yeah, so low phosphate's a bit of a difference. That's more into Saskatchewan and Manitoba, some parts of southern Alberta more so. That one again is mostly, I would say, related. Some of it's related to some high pH soils, especially in the east. But for the most part, we have not been applying removal rates of phosphate in Western Canada. Okay, so it's just, the reality is, like, we're starting to see a lot of wheat yields, spring wheat touching 100 bushels an acre, right? And canola yields getting into the 60s and 70s quite regularly. Well, 60 bushels of canola removes, nearly 60 pounds of P2O5 per acre. So, and not a lot of farms are applying that much. So there's just a net balance there over rotation. That's a problem. The other thing we see is the effect of erosion. So, low levels often don't occur across an entire field. And I guess that's where our services and value come in, right? So what we often will see is, again, the knolls, and this often occurs again in the brown and dark brown soil zones, especially in Saskatchewan. A lot of historical tillage and summer fallow, and a lot of those knolls are very eroded, and all the phosphate gets blown away with the topsoil. And some of it ends up in the depressions, though, right? It's not necessarily gone. It's not to the neighbor's farm. It's sitting down in the depression. So there's those low spots that grew all the crop this year in the drought, right? That's where all the phosphate is, actually.
Drought. We're definitely familiar with that around these parts west. There's no doubt about it. You mentioned lime in gypsum. Are enough growers thinking about this area and like, because I don't hear a lot of discussion. It seems should it be more common of a topic? What are you telling clients?
I think as a whole, is percent of farms that need to look at lime or gypsum, it's still not super high, but yeah, certainly get into that black soil zone of Alberta. And it definitely, it's common to find at least some areas of some fields in the farm that are fairly acidic and would probably benefit from lime. It's just a matter of sort of economics. And what really bothers me is some of the short-term lease agreements and, get into land ownership and all that. It makes it really challenging because a lot of the time you're talking about maybe a 3 or even possibly 5-year payback. Right. Because these are costly operations. But yeah, I think it is getting talked about more, in the areas that need it. And, there's other agronomists recognizing there's some issues too. So that's good. There's companies like North Star Agriculture, dealing with, cement kiln dust and, using products other than sort of that true egg lime that ultimately has to come from in the mountains. And freight just kills you. Like it's, if you're farming at Lloydminster, to haul ag lime from, like Banff, is just the freight alone is unaffordable. So yeah, there's some other options. Wood ash too. We have some clients using wood ash, and that's another option in some areas.
We've got more coming up here with Wes Andersen of Croptimistic Technologies. When we come back, you're listening to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup, weed control, field trial results, yield strategies, and so much more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF, Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest podcast today.
Your Co-op Grow team are your local experts, because we live here too. Our agronomic specialists stay up to date with the latest research and technology to help support your entire farm operation. Talk to our team for advice tailored to your farm's needs. We have recommendations to help you optimize your crop yield and quality while enhancing the health of your land. Co-op, we're all growing together. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm.
We're going to get back to my conversation with Wes Andersen of Croptimistic Technologies. But first, I want to tell you about The Agronomist. Tonight, it's Monday night, Real Ag in prime time. The Agronomist, hosted by Lindsay Smith, 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain Time, at realagriculture.com/live or on our YouTube channel. Tonight, she has a great one. She'll be talking to James Tansey, who's with Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture, and Tyler Wist, who is with AFC. That's right. You know those two gentlemen. We're talking prairie pest problems. Love conversations with entomologists. And the prairies always, even though it's been kind of dry for the last couple of years, pests are still there. They're still creating havoc. And let's talk about the year that was and the year ahead. Maybe, hopefully, no grasshopper issues next year. I hope that's what they say. Make sure you tune in tonight. It's The Agronomist, hosted by Lindsay Smith. The whole point of the message was, don't be so focused on N. Do you think in some ways, okay, so I know I've had a lot of guests on that have said, okay, don't worry about the micros until you get the macros right. And you know more about all this than I do. So I'm maybe asking the dumb questions, but so in an effort to get people to focus more on things like N as one of the macros, the pendulum is just swinging too far, and we're sort of ignoring some of these other characteristics. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, that might be a good way to put it. I think. I guess one fact, we had quite a soil or tissue testing push this past season as well. So our team in Western Canada did a lot of tissue testing and even by zones and stuff to get a really good picture of what was going on in fields. And nitrogen deficiency or anything below sufficient, really, nitrogen was about 8th down on the list. There's things like phosphate and copper and zinc were actually at the top of the list for the most common deficiencies, right? And the tissue test is sort of the ultimate blood test, right, for what the plants are seeing. Sometimes there's things that go on in the soil that just simply don't allow the nutrients to be taken up. So a tissue test kind of is the be all end all to tell you what's going on. And yeah, it correlates with what we see in a lot of the soil tests too. So that's good. And, yeah, I think the effort to really push yields and everything has resulted in some often higher than necessary nitrogen rates, or just, or just sort of a lack of focus on the other things. So,
so tissue, are you a big believer in tissue tests? And everybody has an opinion on it. Like, I know I'm open. This is a whole Pandora's box here. And one of the questions I have to that is, how often should I be doing that kind of stuff? Like, I've been to some of these high yield meetings that they have in the US, and it's like, doing tissue tests weekly.
Yeah,
that seems like a lot. I don't know. Maybe some people that is working for them, and I'm not going to be the judge at all here. I'm just trying to understand from a best management practice standpoint, is there value in that tissue test?
Yeah, we've played with them a bit over the years and struggled at times. We've learned a few things. I will say that. I think we've learned that to really get much value at all, we need to take like at least 2 samples in a field, right? So you're either comparing a treatment within the same SWOT zone so that you're comparing apples to apples in regards to soil. But where we see the most value is probably tissue testing 3 SWOT zones within a field. So getting sort of the full breadth of what's going on in that landscape. So one up in the knoll where it's relatively dry, mid slope, and then more of a depressional area. And those have been really, really valuable. And then sort of comparing them to soil tests is just sort of the complete picture, really. So.
Okay. Now, before I let you go, I think you mentioned SWOT zones, and I think this is important. That kind of makes what you do and how you look at a field different than some others. Just talk about that really quick so that we understand kind of what you're talking about there.
Yeah, well, we map the stable soil and water attributes in a field. So topography, water flow and accumulation areas, texture, salts, and put it all together in one map, essentially. So, and the one thing that's essentially common between all SWOT maps is zone 1 is the driest part of the landscape, either due to texture, landscape position, or both. And then zone 10 is kind of the wettest. So, it's a high resolution soil based map, made for soil applied inputs. Not doing grid sampling, but actually looking at samples relative to those characteristics you just outlined. Yeah, I mean, effectively, we're trying to divide the field up into 10 different areas, and each area is it has a lot less variance, or is similar to itself, right? So you can have an area over in one corner of the field, an area over in the other corner of the field that are very similar landscape position and soil texture and water potential, essentially, right? And then we can combine we're sort of combining those into the zone and soil testing them together.
Very cool. Okay, I got one more question, I promise. Then I'll let you go, Wes. Mm-hmm. So you've referenced Western Canada several times here. Is this issue now that the nutrients may be different, but is this whole premise of the large focus on N and ignoring some of the others? Is that also happening Central Eastern Canada, the US, Australia? What's your experience when you compare the Canadian samples, Western Canada versus some of these other geographies?
Yeah, I don't see a lot of the samples from our partners just when they sort of ask for help and a second opinion, but every geography is a bit different. So Ontario is very aware of potassium deficiencies in use, for example. I would say the US is a little bit better in respect to phosphorus and potassium as well. Australia actually is very aware of things like calcium and low pH. I mean, they have heaps of soil acidity issues. They do a lot of liming. It's just simply regular practice. So yeah, every part of the world is a bit different. And, some of these problems are a bit sneaking up and new to certain regions too, right? And soil acidity is one that's fairly new to Western Canada.
And we still have a lot of room for growth of people using VR in terms of getting these solving some of these problems.
Yeah, we certainly do. I mean, like there's probably only about 15% of the market in Western Canada that's variable rating right now, right? And then when we get into those applications like lime that might cost $150 or $200 an acre, it's almost the only way to go. It's the only way it's going to be profitable. So
great stuff. Wes, we got to talk more often. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the insights, and keep up the great work there at Croptimistic Technology. Really appreciate you joining me here today.
Thank you.
That was Wes Andersen of Croptimistic Technologies joining me from Australia. Yes, great stuff. Hey, Wes, so insightful on that topic. Really appreciate him joining us. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to roll over to Peter Pete Johnson. He's coming up right after this.
CDC Endure is a new oat line from Alliance Seed. High yielding with excellent disease resistance and the quality end users ask for, all in one great oat variety. CDC Endure provides the high beta-glucan levels to make heart-healthy products like breakfast cereals. For more information on CDC Endure oats, as well as any other products from Alliance Seed, check out allianceseed.com or visit any Alliance Seed authorized retailers.
What were the issues in your fields this year? Did you do a soil sample? What is your soil sample telling you about some of the nutrient issues that you might be having going into next year? What herbicides did you use? What residues you might be concerned about? What weed issues did you have? What crop residues did you have? How well do you know your fields?
Get the answers to all the questions you have about your pulse crop at the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. Low-rate MBPT solutions claim to protect nitrogen, but wait, no imitator product delivers like Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, the next generation urease inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. See how others stack up to the proven power for Anvil at defendyourn.ca. Let's keep the Agronomic Monday show here rolling. Up next, it's Peter Pete Johnson. Pete, how are you doing on this Monday?
I'm awesome, thanks, Shaun. You know, the weather could be a little less rainy so that we could get a little more done in the field, but it's funny, growers, and it's really variable as it always is. So my own farm, it's just about impossible to get anything done. Every time it rains, we get 0.3 of an inch or 7 millimeters, and other areas get a trace or 2 millimeters, and they get going again, and we don't. But we'll get there eventually. It's just I seem to be in the rain zone, and that's a little frustrating from a farm work standpoint.
Yeah, we had Mark Brock on the show on Thursday from Staffa, and he was talking about how, this rain's not super convenient, and try not to make a mess in the fields too, right? When it gets a little bit greasy, we're also thinking about, we're obviously focused on trying to get that crop off, but we also don't want to create a whole bunch of compaction issues.
100%. Actually, I had a grower contact me on the weekend saying, the ground conditions are pretty good. What do you think about hauling manure? And so it was solid manure, and so that's not as heavy as liquid manure. And I said, well, it rained Saturday morning, so if it's mucky on the surface, stay off, because that's just all bad. But if it does get so that it can carry, and he's a tillage guy, I think you can do that. But this balance between maintaining good soil structure and good soil aggregate stability, because that's what happens with compaction is we wipe that out, and getting the work done, it's a challenge, and it'll get worse as we get into November. Remember, Shaun, that as we get cooler, we get a lot less evaporation from the soil surface. We're to the point now where the crop is done, so we're not getting any evapotranspiration through the crops, and now it's just evaporation, and we don't get much evaporation when the high is 8 and the low is 2. Things don't move very fast.
Yeah. Well, hey, I wanted to ask you, you heard my conversation previously here with Wes Andersen from Croptimistic Technologies talking about, maybe potentially some of the over focus on N, or, that comment relative to some of the other nutrients that a plant needs. What are some of your thoughts or reactions to what Wes and I talked about?
Yeah, so that's just a great discussion, Shaun. I really loved it. And Wes is bang on because there's so much more there than nitrogen. And so the old adage, and he didn't use this, but the old adage is spend your first dime on lime. Because if you have low pH, it just screws up everything. The problem is that with nitrogen, it's the one-hit wonder, but it is the wonder kid of the nutrients. And I mean, I got to be careful because sulfur plays in there as well. You can screw that up. But why do we focus on nitrogen? It's because that's what gives the big yield boost. And everything else that Wes said is right. All of those other nutrients, like if you have low phosphorus, I think I've hammered this, enough times, low potash, you have to have those soil bank accounts built up into the medium range. And in fact, if you have low potash, the Ohio research would say that it takes more nitrogen to get less yield. Like the maximum yield on low potash soils is lower than it is on medium test potash soils, but it takes more nitrogen to get to that lower yield. So there's lots of things going on there. But at the end of the day, you just can't short yourself for nitrogen. That's why we focus on nitrogen. And the real problem is that we go out there and in Western Canada, you guys have been dry, right, Shaun?
That would be fairly accurate.
Yeah, exactly. So in the spring, I'm optimistic because farmers are optimists in the spring, and then they become pessimists all growing season long. And then at harvest, hopefully they're I'm an optimist again. It's okay, but every spring you got to be an optimist to go to the field. And I'm going to get 100 bushel spring wheat, hard red spring wheat in Alberta. And you go out there and you put on whatever that is, 100 pounds of nitrogen or 150 pounds of nitrogen. And then you get 20 bushels because you get no rainfall. Well, the crop didn't use that nitrogen. And guess what? That nitrogen acidifies the soil. So, and this is happening in Montana. It's happening in Saskatchewan. In all the dry zones, we are seeing pHs drop, particularly where we over-fertilize with nitrogen. And the challenge is, if I only fertilize for a 20 bushel crop and then I get the moisture, I needed the nitrogen to get to that 60, 70, 80 bushel crop, whatever the potential was. So it's a real dilemma, but that nitrogen fertilizer is 100% acidifying those soils. And that's why I think Wes is seeing more pH problems. And the pH problems, as he pointed out, are very, very specific areas in the field. And so doing a good job on soil sampling and knowing where they are, and crop growth can help you identify that as well. But again, I come back, spend the first time on lime. And when we talk about cutting back on nitrogen, that is a pretty tough sled just because of the value of that nitrogen when we do have crop yield potential.
And so, Pete, quickly, what's the consequence of that lower pH? What is that creating, just in case people aren't totally fully aware of it?
So low pH, we get the aluminum becomes more available. And so it's just how it works in the soil. Different nutrients have different availabilities at different pH levels. As the pH drops, in particular, aluminum becomes more available. The aluminum reacts with the phosphorus, which makes the phosphorus much less available to the plant. So one of the mitigating factors as your pH just kind of trickles down is add more phosphorus. But long term, you get into aluminum toxicity. And once you have a toxicity with a metal like aluminum, there ain't no rectifying that until such time as you can raise that pH.
Oh, fascinating. The interrelationship of all these nutrients is, I continually feel like I have so much to learn and really kind of understand this. So it's a very, very important topic for everybody, I think, to kind of get their full head around. Okay, so last week on the show we had it was our Thanksgiving Monday special here in Canada, and we had Jeremy Boychin from Alberta Grains join us. Now he got an email from a listener who asked, why don't Ontario farmers soil sample in front of winter wheat? You had alluded to the fact this doesn't happen. Why is that the case, Pete?
So again, we're talking about nitrogen sampling, right, Shaun?
Yep.
So in Western Canada, you guys better test for nitrogen because your nitrogen doesn't disappear. You're a dry climate. It goes cold. Under those cold, frozen conditions, the nitrogen stays there. It's not how it works in the Great Lakes Basin. Here in Ontario, and I'm Shane, my great technician, and I've done all these trials. Man, you apply fall nitrogen, and you can pretty much kiss that goodbye by next spring because we get full moisture recharge. Remember, we're 35 inches of rainfall over the entire season, and it's about 3 inches a month. So nothing grows in November, December, January, February, or March. You got 5 months, nothing growing, and you get 15 inches of rain. Guess what? Full moisture recharge, wet, cold soils, denitrification, leaching. We have had zero luck with fall nitrogen soil tests predicting nitrogen response or even nitrogen availability the next year. And in fact, in spring cereals or in winter wheat, even a spring soil nitrate test has not proven to be very valuable.
Really?
Because, we always start so close to zero, right? And then it depends on the temperature. When does it get warm? How warm does the soil get? How quickly does the organic matter start to release that nitrogen? So our best nitrogen test is the pre-hydrate nitrate test that we do for corn, and that's way too late for winter wheat. So we're talking June the 5th, June the 10th. We're not putting nitrogen on winter wheat anymore, and even on spring cereals, they're well along. But that June test, now we've had some nitrogen breakdown out of the organic matter, so that June test becomes of some value. And it's not perfect. It only actually explains about 30% of the yield variability, but that's better than the 0 or 2% that we get with a fall nitrogen soil sample for winter wheat or for any crop for that matter. So just different climates, right?
Yeah.
You go across North America, across the globe, what works in one area, you just got to understand why it works there and then see, will it work in another jurisdiction?
So interesting, because in Canada, we have the Canadian Shield that separates the two geographies. So it's easy to make that sort of that geographical, like west versus east. In the US, it's more of a straight land body. So where is kind of the transition zone when it comes to this kind of question?
So it just comes as you go east of Mississippi. So you get east of Chicago, you start getting drier and drier and drier. And once you get less than about 20 inches of rain, then fall nitrogen soil samples become something that will be of value. Once you go over, and I'm just pulling that 20. I have to actually look at the research, but exactly. But it's way back when they first came to North America, the white settlers and going across, and there was some, I can't remember his name, but some famous geologist that looked at that and basically said once you went west of the Mississippi, it would be hard to crop because there just wasn't enough rainfall. And his line might have been not exact because we do pretty well in Wisconsin and in Iowa. But again, you get into North and South Dakota, particularly west North and South Dakota, Montana. She gets pretty dry in those regions.
Yeah,
so if you're not getting a lot of winter moisture, then fall nitrogen soil samples will work. This
conversation reminds me of the very first time that we met Pete. Do you remember that?
I do. It was at the Southwest Ag Conference, and you wanted some idiot to interview, and so I was kind of that idiot.
Yeah, and my question to you was, so Pete, no, I don't think it was South. I don't think it was SWAC. It was in the fall because my question. We were at an office with.
Oh, were we? Okay.
With C&M Seeds. I was with at the time Archie Wilson, and I interviewed you in a room, like a pale sort of beige room. I could probably find the video, and I had asked you, "Okay, Pete. Hey, it's fall. Probably a good time to break out our soil tests and see what we got for nutrients." And you looked at me and you said, "Shaun, we don't do that here." In the politest of ways, Pete. in the politest of ways, you corrected me. So I will never forget that. Okay, hey, let's take a break. We got more coming up here with Peter Pete Johnson. We'll be right back right after this.
At Brett Young, we focus on what's real. It's how we became Canada's largest independent seed company. That's why we're asking a real farmer, what do you think of BY6217TF, Brett Young's TrueFlex Canola Hybrid?
What's that?
BY6217TF, Brett Young's TrueFlex Canola Hybrid with Pod Defender shatter reduction technology and Defender-rated club root and blackleg resistance.
Good yield, yeah. Probably choose it again.
Thanks, Chris. Talk to your Brett Young retailer today to see for yourself. Brett Young, distinct by design.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. Shaun Haney, your host, joined by Peter Pete Johnson. Hey, you want true nitrogen protection? Oh, well, let me tell you. Skip imitator products for an agronomically effective solution like Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. Super U protects against all three forms of loss and is proven to boost yield potential. See how others stack up at defendyourn.ca. Okay, Pete, you've been preaching a lot of stuff for decades, and it's paying off because you got a couple examples of growers thinking about growing their wheat with the same intensity and precision and focus that they would put to some of the other crops like corn. Tell me about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, Shaun, that you say Pete's been preaching because, I do sort of get on my pulpit every once in a while and pound the pulpit. Come on, people, you got to actually manage the wheat crop. And what's really fun is that it's bearing some fruit, if you will. And it's not just me. I mean, let's be real. It's Dennis Pennington from Michigan State. It's Joanna Fallings from the Ministry of Agriculture. It's the YEN program. Like we really have ramped up the focus on wheat. But what's so cool is that we talk about how wheat develops and grows and the importance of early planting, but it's not just the planting date, it's when it emerges, and it should take 150 growing degrees for that crop to emerge. And so two growers, Nature Nut Nick from Strathroy, sending me an email saying, hey, October 3rd planted wheat, 135 growing degree days, it's emerging. I thought it was supposed to take 150. Well, Nick, you planted shallow, right? We had that discussion. It was hard and dry, and you couldn't get the drill in the ground, and you drilled it anyway, and then you got a nice shower, 10 millimeters to start it. So a little bit shallower, a few less than 150 growing degrees. And Dean at Bornholm actually texted me a picture. He was recording the high and low temperature, calculating the growing degree days, a running total. He was at 148 and a half growing degree days, and his wheat was spiking through. And, Shaun, what we've learned out of the YEN program is the growers that pay attention to detail, that, do this kind of thought process and understand what's going on. They are the growers that blow the doors off from a wheat yield perspective. And it's just so cool that Preacher Pete is finally seeing some of these people step up and follow the crop and get out in the field and pay attention, and that's just cool.
Well, you reminded me of a quote. I think arguably, or maybe it's not even an argument anymore, the most successful college football coach of all time, Nick Saban. He says, if you have talent but you're complacent or don't pay attention to detail, you get nothing. I think it kind of applies, right? And I think sometimes you can tell. So when you tell that story, I think it's the verbiage. You can tell a lot about the details that somebody pays attention to on any given topic based on some of the verbiage that they use, right? It's like, it's, 125.5 growing degree. Like, it's the precision of that. It's not like, it's 100-ish or it's, I don't know, somewhere under 150. It's the precision of it. And I remember this observation when I think about the corn grower in like the Midwest, okay? Who, families been growing corn forever. And there's some of the same situations in Southwestern Ontario where it's like, there's my corn I planted on May 12th. There's my corn planted on May 14th. That's different than there's my April corn, my May corn, and my June corn. There's a difference there.
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that, but I when I saw Dean's chart and he was calculating 148.5, I just laughed. But that's actually paying attention and recording things and then following them through and seeing, okay, I did that this year on, under these conditions, that was a bust, or that was awesome, and then trying to recreate or trying to fix when it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
It's just very cool.
Be obsessive about it. I like it. Okay, so what we've been hearing from on the Farmer Rapid Fire on Thursdays is some people being pleased with their soybean yield so far. Okay, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but I think people are pleased about that. There is cautious optimism about the corn crop. I think people are sort of sandbagging me a little bit when they're talking about it. But one of the concerns out there is gibberella, and you've been talking about this for several weeks. I think, was it 2018? I don't want to, like, that was the high dawn year. But I think Correct. Some people have there's some concern on some of the gibberella levels.
Yeah, and we don't have the dawn survey back from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food here in Ontario yet. They took it. They're hopeful to have those results back midweek or by Friday of this week. So pay attention to that. That will give us some better insight. But what we are seeing, and agronomists, connecting with me, and we're really seeing some hot spots. Not looking like it's a provincial issue like it was in 2018. 2018, it was just bad almost everywhere. But where it's bad, and it's interesting because it's individual fields in some of these hotspot areas, and you'd say, it's the same hybrid on two different farms, and that farm, it's basically clean. There's some always, but it's not bad. This farm is, oh my gosh, like this is ugly. What the heck's going on? And we haven't sorted out why that is, but it's so incredibly important to get out there and scout and know which of those fields that do look like they have high gibberella infection levels, because gib itself does not necessarily mean high DON levels, high toxin levels. But man, if you have the gib there, the longer you leave it in the field, the greater the toxin level, the DON level is likely going to be. It gets under stress. It's still trying to grow. And that's when it tends to create more of the DON toxin. So you want to get out there early. There was even a report of one grower that looked at a field and said, oh, this is horrible, and tried to combine it. It was 40% moisture. Well, you just can't do that. It just turns into mush. So we have to wait till it's mature, till we can get a decent sample. That's probably about 29 or 30% moisture. And as soon as it gets there on those bad fields, I think you just have to go and get it out so that you minimize the amount of issues that we could run into.
Did anybody reach out to you about helping you out with your straw chopping situation?
No, I'm so hurt, Shaun. Nobody.
Oh God, you're still in the predicament.
Yeah, and the problem is, and I actually had this discussion with a couple of growers who said, Pete, like, why don't you do X, Y, or Z? My big problem is that I have so few acres that spending $20,000 on a new chopper when I'm doing 100 or 200 acres where you just got man, the economics on that gets really tough. But I'm still looking for that used Redicop chopper for the back of my 9,500 combine. So if you got one, reach out.
Come on, people, help him out here. Help him out. Come on. Look, think of all the value that Pete provides you on a week. Yeah, exactly. It was, I'm trying to think here. It was a couple weeks ago. We were talking about broadcasting wheat and some of the benefits that people have been seeing. And not all geographies is broadcasting wheat really a fit. Moisture is definitely something that you kind of need to have, depending on where you are. But you've been hearing about people finding some treated wheat in their soybeans. This means we're broadcasting into standing soybeans. A bit of a concern when we're doing this, Pete.
Oh, it's a huge concern, Shaun. Actually, it's a non-starter.
Non-starter?
We cannot have treated wheat seed in harvested soybeans. Full stop. Right? Like that's a clean thing. Whatever process you like, we just can't. If the Canadian Grain Commission finds treated wheat seed in a boatload of soybeans that's going to China, that boatload ain't going to China anymore. Like, the tolerance is zero. And there's a lot more broadcast wheat seed this year because the soybeans were late. I want growers to plant wheat. That would look like a great way to get the job done. But if I use untreated seed, now I'm at high risk of bunt in my wheat crop, which means I could lose my whole entire wheat crop. So I'd rather use treated wheat seed, but then we get this dry September. And I really do think it's related. Super dry September. In fact, I think last week we talked about Eric at Napanee, and Eric, it went 43 days with no rainfall whatsoever. Well, if you broadcast wheat seed into standing soybeans on the 1st of September and you get 43 days with no rainfall, that wheat seed's never going to germinate and never going to grow. And then I come in and harvest my soybeans, and my air reel, those treated soybeans or wheat seeds rather, are sitting on the soil surface. And that air reel, I'm trying to blow that crop into the header. I get even, the odd treated wheat kernel into the combine. It goes into the bin. Now I've got a huge issue. So I'm sort of out of the game anymore. I know a lot of growers won't like to hear this, but I don't want you to broadcast untreated wheat seed, because I think that's a high risk of bunt, and you won't know that till harvest next year in your winter wheat crop. And I don't want you to lose 100% of your winter wheat crop. And yet we use treated wheat seed, and we can't predict the weather. If it had been a wet September, I think the problem would have gone away, because then the treated wheat seed germinates, it grows, it gets roots into the soil. The aerial tries to blow it into the header. No, it's hanging onto the soil. Those roots are keeping it there. So then the problem goes away, but we can't predict September weather. So I just think whichever risk you take, it's too high a risk to take. And I know some growers will continue to do it, and they've done it and had good success for a number of years, Mark Davis in particular. But boy, it's a high risk procedure.
Great stuff. Okay, Pete, we're out of time. I really appreciate it. Have yourself a great week, and we'll chat with you again in a week's time. Really appreciate it, man.
Hunter, thanks for having me, Shaun. We'll see you.
Make sure, everybody, that you download this week's episode of Wheat Pete's Word. A new episode drops every Wednesday, and Pete does such an awesome job answering your agronomic questions. Western Canada, the U.S., Central and Eastern Canada as well. So please check it out. Wheat Pete's Word, wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any feedback on today's show, we talked a lot today about nutrients, and Pete and Wes provided their expertise and their insight. If you've got some additional questions you want me to put towards them, or maybe you got some thoughts on what they said, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can, of course, call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we will chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Economics. With one-of-a-kind tools, research, and content, Economics is farming's go-to information resource. Find it all on nutrient-economics.com or download the app.